In the world of geopolitics, who is India's most trusted friend? Good question. This is a question that many Indians have. And let me, explain what things are like. There are no friends in geopolitics. There are no friends, there are no enemies. There are allies and there are adversaries, and alliances and adversarial engagements are always temporary in nature. Nothing is permanent, nothing is set in stone. Let me give you an example. For the past 2,500 years, ever since China became, well, ever since China emerged as a civilization 2,500 years ago, all this time, India and China have never had an adversarial relationship. Never in the past 2,500 years. It's only after the Chinese Communist Party under Mao Zedong came to power in the 1950s or thereabouts that India and China became adversaries. The adversarial relationship happened because of Chinese actions. It started with the conquest of Tibet, the illegal annexation of Tibet, and then they started having designs on further Indian territory. So, this is the first time in 2.5 millennia that India and China have become an adversarial relationship. So, for the longest time, India and China were very good, not neighbors, because Tibet was always the common neighbor. But now you have this situation. Let's take another example: India and Russia. Like I said, India officially was non-aligned, but unofficially, and for all real intents and purposes, it was an ally and a satellite of the Soviet Union during the so-called Cold War. Now, after the Cold War ended, after the USSR disintegrated, a new republic was born, Russia, the Russian Union, Russian Republic. And the relationship between India and Russia hasn't been the way the India USSR relationship was. This relationship is not black and white, it's not straightforward, it is not a straightforward relationship. It is complicated, as we know. Russia is currently engaged in various other uh, relationships with countries such as China and Pakistan, which India would never have expected if it was the Cold War. So, Indians always look upon Russia as a great friend, right? But that was a relationship that was mutually beneficial at that time. Today, Russia finds benefit elsewhere. It still has a reasonably good relationship with India, but it isn't the way it was, right? It isn't unconditional the way it was during the Cold War. So things change. Before 1947, there was no Pakistan, so we did not have any issue on the western border. Today, we have this issue because this new temporary nation exists there currently, and so on and so forth. So there are no friends. Okay, once again, we talk about Israel, and Indians love Israel. Israel is our bosom buddy, our great friend. India and Israel have shared interests, and that is why the relationship is so good. India and Israel are in some ways in a very similar position, in a very similar situation. So that is why the interests of these two nations converge to a great deal, and that is why there is such a great amount of cooperation between the two nations. Things can change in the future, right? So there is nothing permanent in geopolitics. There are no friends or enemies. There are temporary alliances and temporary adversarial relationships. If we understand this, then we will be able to see the world for what it really is. It is a transient place. In geopolitics, the smallest unit of time is the decade. Nothing happens year after year. Okay, if you want to see change on the geopolitical level, you have to see it decade by decade. And if you see it that way, then you will see how the alliances and even borders change from time to time. So that is the lens through which we must look upon geopolitics. It is the realistic lens, not the idealistic lens. We have to be realistic and pragmatic and recognize the fact that every nation has its own interests. And when interests converge, we're going to work together. When interests diverge, we're going to either drift apart or even become adversaries. So that's how it works.